In this lecture, you'll learn how to use the following kinds of form controls: input, text area, file, color, and data list. Here we see the various form controls. First, we have a text input, which applies to various textual inputs, like for example, type text, type search, type email, type URL, type tell, type password, and type number. So first we have the label, and then we have an input with a placeholder. This is what the value will look like. Next example is the text area. We can set the height in a number of rows if we want to. Then we see different sizing of the text input. We have a small and large size. We can create a read-only variation of the text input. We can also create a read-only plain text variation where it will look like plain text. And notice that we cannot select these read-only, we can only read them, not select and not edit. Then we have a color picker. Right here we can click it and it will open up a native color picker where we can change the color or type in the value. And finally we have this data list here that will come with suggestions when you type, but you can also add something else like whatever you want. So this is just a suggestion to a text input. Please notice that there are other form controls as well. We have separate lectures for these. Select, checks, file, range. Okay, let's get started with the text input. So in our browser, we'll add a label, the for attribute with the value input text, and the class will be form label. We'll add the text input label. Now we'll connect this to our input with the type text and the class form control. We'll give it the placeholder text input placeholder, like so. And to connect these, we add the ID input text, which we were referring to up here. So this is how they are connected when the users are clicking. Let's create the text area example as well before we look at this in the browser. So we add a label with the for attribute with the value text area and the class form label and the text area. Then we create the text area element with the class form control, the ID text area to connect this to the label, and we'll set the height to 5 rows using the rows attribute, the value of 5, and then at the placeholder write your message here. And for this element we need to close the text area tag again. So regular input elements are self-closing but not text area elements, so remember that. We'll save, go back and select the screencast tab, and here we see the text input and the text area input. Next up, let's look at the sizing for text inputs. So let's just copy these 2 lines here, scroll down and paste it in. Now let's update the for and ID attributes to input text small. And to make this small, we'll simply add the modifier class to the input element, form control SM. Let's copy and paste this down here and change this to form control LG, as well as change the for and ID attributes to input text large. Now we'll preview these different sizes in the browser, refresh. Here we see the small input and the large input. Next up, we'll take a look at how to create the read-only text input. So we'll scroll back up and copy this default code here, scroll down again and paste it in. Now let's update the for and ID attributes to input text read-only, like so. And then we'll add the read-only attribute at the end. We'll also create a read-only plain text variation of this. So let's just copy and paste this down here, update the for attribute to input text read only, plain text. We'll keep the read-only attribute, but we'll change this class for the input element from form control to form control plain text. Now let's save this, go back and refresh. You see the read-only input element and the read-only plain text, where we cannot see the background or the border of the input element. So these cannot be selected or edited, we can only read them. Next up is the color picker example. So in our code editor, we start with creating the link with the for attribute being input color, and then the class form label. We'll give it the text color input label, and after this we'll create our input tag with the type attribute with the value color this time, and it will give the class form control as well as the modifier form control color. We'll give it the ID input color, which we used in the for attribute before, and the value will be this hex value here, 7952B3. We'll also give it a title, the value choose color. So this is a kind of a placeholder or for the input element. We'll save this, go back and refresh. First we see the label, and when we click on the label or the color picker itself, it will open up this native control here where we can change the color. Next up is our data list example. So we scroll down to the last example here, add our label with the for attribute data list and the class form label, like so. We'll give it the text data list label. Now we'll create an input element with the class form control and the list attribute with the value data list options. Give it the ID data list and the placeholder type to search. So this list here has the value data list options, and we'll use that value now. We'll do that with a data list tag, like so, and the ID data list options. So now they are connected, and inside this we can add options with a value attribute. First will be Bootstrap, and notice we won't close these options. It's not that what we're used to from a select element. So it's just like this without any closing options. Next one will be foundation. It's a little annoying that VS Code is trying to auto close this option element. Then we have Bulma, and finally we have materialize. So once again, to recap, we have an input element with no type attribute. Instead, we have this list attribute that references this data list element here with options inside. These options are self-closed. They are not like the other options found in a select element. So now let's save this, go back and refresh. Here we can see our input. We can see the suggestions popping up natively, and we can type in some characters and see what happens. So you can type in anything we want. So this acts like a regular text input with these suggestions in the data list. So this was all about form controls.